Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is James Hollowell, but everyone calls me Jimmy. I've been a forest ranger for 18 years now, fighting fires in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. In all that time, I've seen just about everything these mountains can throw at you. Lightning strikes that turn thousand-year-old oaks into torches, flash floods that can sweep a man away in seconds, and winds so fierce they can snap trees like matchsticks. But I never believed in ghosts, not until October of 1978. See, I'm third-generation Appalachian. My granddaddy worked these mountains, and his daddy before him. We're practical folk. We believe in what we can see, touch, and measure. When the old-timers would sit on their porches talking about haints and mountain spirits, I'd just shake my head and walk on by. I should have listened. That October was different from the start. The leaves turned early, painting the mountainsides in brilliant reds and golds. But underneath all that beauty, something felt wrong. The animals were acting strange. Bears coming down to lower elevations when they should have been fattening up for winter, birds flying in confused circles, and the usual forest sounds just stopped. I was stationed at the fire tower on Whitetop Mountain, about 15 miles from the nearest road. At 5,520 feet up, it's one of the highest peaks in Virginia. On a clear day, you can see for miles in every direction. But that October, thick fog rolled in and stayed, turning the world into a gray soup that never seemed to lift. The tower itself is a steel structure, about 60 feet tall, with a small cabin at the top where I'd spend my shifts. It's got all the equipment we need: an Osborne fire finder for spotting smoke, weather instruments, and a radio that usually keeps me connected to headquarters down in the valley. Usually being the key word. My partner that month was Tommy Ridgway. Good man, 8 years on the job, steady as they come. Tommy had a wife and 2 little kids waiting for him at home, and he took his job seriously. He knew that a fire spotted 10 minutes earlier could mean the difference between losing a few acres or losing whole communities. The trouble started on October 15th. I was doing my morning weather report when the radio crackled to life with voices I'd never heard before. They were speaking in some kind of language I couldn't understand. Lots of clicking sounds and rhythms that seemed almost like chanting. Tommy, I called over to where he was cleaning the firefinder's lens. You hearing this? He walked over and listened for a minute, his face growing puzzled. Sounds like some kind of Indian language, he said. But there ain't been any Cherokee around here for over 100 years. I fiddled with the radio dial, trying to find a clear channel. The voices kept cutting in and out, sometimes fading to whispers, sometimes rising to what sounded like war cries. Every time I thought I'd found a clear frequency, they'd come back. Atmospheric interference, Tommy said, but he didn't sound convinced. You know how these mountains can bounce radio signals around. That's what we told ourselves. Anyway, it was easier than thinking about the alternative. The fog that day was so thick we couldn't see past the base of the tower. I'd been watching weather patterns for nearly 2 decades, and I'd never seen anything like it. It moved wrong, swirling in patterns that defied the wind, sometimes forming shapes that looked almost deliberate. Around noon, Tommy decided to do a perimeter check. Standard procedure when visibility is low. You walk the area around the tower, looking for any signs of fire or trouble that you might miss from up high. I'll be back in an hour, he said, strapping on his radio and gear belt. If you don't hear from me in 2 hours, call it in. I watched him disappear into the fog, his footsteps crunching on the frost-covered leaves. The sound faded, quickly, swallowed up by the gray mist that seemed to eat everything. 2 hours passed, then 3. Tommy never came back. I called headquarters as soon as the 2-hour mark hit, but the radio was acting up worse than ever. Every time I tried to transmit, those strange voices would cut in, drowning out my calls for help. The Cherokee words, because that's what they were, I was sure of it now, seemed to get louder and more urgent every time I keyed the microphone. By nightfall, I was getting desperate. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down the tower stairs to look for Tommy myself. The fog was so thick I could barely see my own feet, but I followed the trail he would have taken, a worn path that circled the tower about a quarter-mile out. I found his equipment about halfway around the circuit, but it wasn't dropped or scattered like you'd expect if he'd fallen or gotten hurt. It was arranged in a perfect circle: his radio, his compass, his water bottle, even his Bultus ranger hat, all sitting in the dead leaves like someone had placed them there on purpose. And in the center of the circle, pressed deep into the soft earth, was a footprint. Not Tommy's boot print. This was bare feet, but bigger than any human foot I'd ever seen. The toes were elongated, almost claw-like, and there were markings around the edges that looked like, well, like war paint. I stood there in the fog, my flashlight beam shaking in my hand, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Tommy wouldn't have taken off his gear. He was too professional for that. And he sure as hell wouldn't have arranged it in some kind of ritual pattern. That's when I heard the drums. They started soft, just a rhythmic beating that I thought might be my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. But they got louder, echoing off the mountains in a way that didn't make sense. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, bouncing around in the fog until I couldn't tell which direction it was coming from. I ran back to the tower. The radio was going crazy when I got there. Not just the Cherokee voices now, but what sounded like dozens of people talking at once, their words overlapping and mixing until it became a wall of sound. And underneath it all, those drums kept beating. I tried calling headquarters again, screaming into the microphone, but my voice just got swallowed up by the chaos coming through the speakers. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went quiet. Dead quiet. No wind, no insects, no radio static. Even the drums had stopped. It was like the whole mountain was holding its breath. That's when I saw the first one. Just a glimpse through the fog, a tall figure standing at the edge of the clearing around the tower. It was there for maybe 2 seconds before it melted back into the mist, but I saw enough to make my blood run cold. It looked like a man, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, wearing what looked like traditional Indian dress, most feathers and leather and war paint that seemed to glow in the darkness. And its eyes, God, its eyes were like burning coals in a face that was there 1 second and gone the next. I blinked, and it was gone. But I knew it had been real. I knew it had been watching me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the tower cabin with my back to the wall, Tommy's rifle across my knees, watching the fog swirl outside the windows. Every now and then I'd catch movement out there, shapes that moved like men but didn't quite look human, always staying just at the edge of sight. The drums started up again around midnight, but this time they were closer. Much closer. And mixed in with the rhythmic beating, I could hear voices chanting in that same Cherokee language I'd been hearing on the radio. By morning, I was about ready to climb down from that tower and walk the 15 miles to the nearest road, fog or no fog. But when the sun came up, everything looked normal again. The fog lifted a little, the radio cleared up, and I managed to get through to headquarters. "This is Hollowell at White Top Tower," I said into the microphone. "I need immediate backup. Ranger Ridgway is missing." Captain Morrison's voice crackled back through the static. "Copy that, Hollowell. What's the situation?" I started to tell him about the arranged equipment, the footprints, the figures in the fog. But as the words came out of my mouth, they sounded crazy even to me. How do you explain something like that to a man who's never set foot outside the office? "Ridgway didn't return from perimeter check yesterday," I said instead. "Weather conditions are poor. Request search team." "Roger. Team will be there by 1400 hours. Maintain position and continue normal operations." "Normal operations, right." The backup team arrived that afternoon, Morrison himself, plus 2 other rangers I knew. Good men, all of them, but they looked at me like I was halfway to losing my mind when I showed them where I'd found Tommy's gear. "Could be bears," Morrison said, nudging Tommy's radio with his boot. "Sometimes they'll move things around, play with equipment." But I could see in his eyes that he didn't believe it either. Bears don't arrange things in perfect circles, and they sure don't leave footprints like the ones pressed into the earth around Tommy's gear. The search team stayed 3 days, combing every inch of forest within a 5-mile radius of the tower. They found nothing. No sign of Tommy, no trace of where he might have gone. It was like he'd just vanished into thin air. On the second night, things got worse. We were all bunked down in the tower cabin, 4 grown men in a space barely big enough for 2. Morrison was snoring in one corner, while Jenkins and Parker played cards by lamplight. I was on watch, monitoring the radio and weather instruments. That's when the Cherokee voices came back. This time, though, I could understand some of what they were saying. Don't ask me how I don't speak Cherokee, never learned more than a few words. But somehow, the meaning was getting through to me, like the words were being translated directly into my brain. Asterisk, protect the sacred ground, asterisk. The voices whispered through the static. Asterisk, guard the bones of our fathers. Asterisk. I turned to wake the others, but they were all sleeping sound as babies. The radio voices that were clear as day to me didn't seem to be disturbing them at all. Asterisk, fire keeper. Asterisk, the voices said, and I knew they were talking to me. Asterisk, you have walked on sacred earth. You have disturbed the rest of our people. Asterisk. I grabbed the microphone with shaking hands. Who is this? What do you want? The response came not through the radio, but from outside the tower. War cries echoed across the mountain, bouncing off the peaks and valleys, until it sounded like there were hundreds of warriors surrounding us. The sound was so loud, and that Morrison jolted awake, looking around in confusion. What the hell was that? He demanded. You didn't hear the radio? I asked. He looked at me like I was crazy. The radio was silent, nothing but soft static coming through the speakers. The next morning, we found more footprints around the tower. Dozens of them, all bare feet, all too big to be human. They formed a perfect circle around the base of the tower, like a ring of warriors had stood guard all night. Morrison tried to explain it away. Kids from town playing pranks, maybe, or some kind of hoax. But I could see the fear in his eyes. These mountains have a way of getting under your skin, making you believe in things you never thought possible. It was on the 3rd night that we saw the fire. I was on watch again when I spotted the orange glow through the trees, maybe 2 miles south of the tower. Fire in October, with all the dry leaves and low humidity, was every ranger's worst nightmare. I immediately started the alert procedures, calling headquarters and preparing to coordinate the response. But when I looked through the firefinder to get an exact bearing on the blaze, something was wrong. The fire wasn't spreading the way it should. Instead of moving downhill with the wind, it was climbing upward, defying every law of physics and fire behavior I'd learned in 18 years on the job. And it was moving in a pattern, not randomly, but deliberately, like it was being guided by some invisible hand. Morrison, I called. We got fire. He stumbled over to the firefinder and took a look for himself. I watched his face go pale as he tracked the flames moving uphill against the wind. That's impossible, he muttered. The fire kept climbing, and as we watched, it began to form shapes in the darkness. At first I thought it was just my imagination, the way you see faces in clouds or animals in rock formations. But the longer I watched, the clearer it became. The flames were dancing in the shape of men, tall, feathered figures made of fire and smoke, moving in what looked like a war dance across the mountainside. Jesus Christ, Parker whispered. He'd come up behind us, drawn by our voices. What the hell is that? We stood there for what felt like hours, watching the impossible fire dance across the mountain. It never spread to the surrounding trees, never consumed anything but seemed to burn in the air itself. And all the while, we could hear the drums again, beating in rhythm with the dancing flames. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the fire went out, not gradually, like a normal fire burning out or being extinguished. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone, leaving nothing but darkness and the smell of sage smoke on the wind. The radio crackled to life. Asterisk, tomorrow, asterisk, the Cherokee voices said. Asterisk, tomorrow you will understand. The firekeeper will choose. Respect the sacred ground or join your friend in the shadow place. Asterisk. I keyed the microphone. Where's Tommy? What have you done with him? But the only answer was laughter. Low, ancient laughter that seemed to come from the mountain itself. Morrison decided we were pulling out the next morning. This is getting too dangerous, he said. Whatever's going on up here, it's beyond our training. We need to call in the state police, maybe the FBI. But I knew better. The FBI doesn't deal with Cherokee war spirits. The state police don't have procedures for supernatural fires that dance across mountainsides. As the others packed their gear, I found myself thinking about what my granddaddy used to say about these mountains. How they were old when the Cherokee first walked them, older than any human memory. How some places were sacred, protected by powers that white men didn't understand and shouldn't mess with. I was starting to think he might have been right. The others left at dawn, but I stayed. I couldn't abandon Tommy, not when I was starting to understand what had really happened to him. The Cherokee voices had called me the Fire Keeper, and I was beginning to realize that meant something important. I spent the morning researching, going through the historical files we kept at the tower. What I found made my blood run cold. White Top Mountain wasn't just any mountain. It was sacred ground to the Cherokee, home to a burial ground that had been used for over 1,000 years. Warriors, chiefs, medicine men, all buried in caves and hidden places throughout the peak. When the Cherokee were forced out in the 1,830 seconds, they'd left their ancestors behind, promising to return and protect the sacred sites. They never got the chance to come back. But that didn't mean they'd stopped protecting this place. The file also mentioned something else, 2 reports. Over the years of strange incidents on the mountain, hikers who'd disappeared and been found days later with no memory of where they'd been, hunters who'd aged decades in a single night, forest fires that behaved in impossible ways, all around the burial grounds. I was still reading when the fog rolled in again, thicker than ever. By noon, I couldn't see more than a few feet from the tower. The radio voices started up again, but this time they were different. Sadder somehow. More urgent. Asterisk, Firekeeper, asterisk, they said. Asterisk, the sacred ground burns. The bones of our fathers are in danger. Asterisk. I looked through the firefinder, scanning the mountainside. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, far to the south, I spotted it. A thin column of smoke rising from exactly where the burial caves were located. A real fire this time, and it was heading straight for the sacred burial ground. I grabbed my gear and headed down the tower. I didn't call headquarters, didn't wait for backup. I knew this was something I had to face alone. The fog made navigation nearly impossible, but somehow I found my way. The Cherokee voices guided me, whispering directions through the mist. Asterisk, left at the lightning tree. Follow the old trail. Hurry, Firekeeper. There is little time. Asterisk, I found the source of the fire about a mile from the burial caves, a lightning strike that had ignited a stand of dry pines. Under normal circumstances, it would have been easy to contain. But the wind was pushing it uphill, toward the sacred ground, and I could see that my usual firefighting techniques weren't going to be enough. That's when I saw Tommy. He was standing at the edge of the fire, but he looked wrong. Older, like he'd aged 20 years in the 4 days he'd been missing. His hair was white, his face deeply lined, and his eyes held a look of terror that chilled me to the bone. "Jimmy," he said, and his voice was the croak of an old man. "They showed me things that happened here. The soldiers who came to drive them out, the families torn apart, the children who died on the trail west." He pointed toward the burial caves. "They're not evil, Jimmy. They're just trying to protect what's left of their people. But if that fire reaches the burial ground..." I understood. The Cherokee spirits had kept Tommy alive, but at a cost. They'd shown him their history, their pain, their desperate need to protect the bones of their ancestors. And now they were asking me to help. The fire was moving faster now, pushed by winds that seemed to come from nowhere. I could see the flames reaching toward the caves, where generations of Cherokee warriors and chiefs lay buried. If the fire reached them, if it desecrated the sacred ground, I thought about all the stories my granddaddy had told me, about respecting the old places, the old powers, about understanding that we were just visitors in these ancient mountains. I made my choice. Instead of fighting the fire, I helped guide it. Using my knowledge of wind patterns and fire behavior, I created fire breaks that channeled the flames, away from the burial caves and toward a rocky area where they could burn themselves out safely. It went against everything I'd been trained to do, but somehow I knew it was right. The Cherokee spirits appeared then, no longer hiding in the fog. Dozens of them, warriors in traditional dress with war paint that glowed like embers. They stood watching as I worked, and I could feel their approval, their gratitude. The fire reached the rocks and died, leaving the burial ground untouched. Asterisk, you have honored the sacred ground, asterisk, the Cherokee chief said, his voice speaking directly into my mind. Asterisk, you understand the old ways. The Firekeeper may go in peace. Asterisk. Tommy collapsed then, the years that had been forced onto him finally taking their toll. But he was alive, and I could see the terrible knowledge fading from his eyes, replaced by the merciful fog of forgotten trauma. I carried Tommy out of the mountains that night, guided by Cherokee spirits who had become protectors, rather than threats. By the time we reached the road, he looked like himself again, still aged, but not impossibly so. The medic said he was suffering from exposure and exhaustion, nothing that a few days in the hospital wouldn't cure. The official report blamed unusual wind patterns for the fire's strange behavior. Captain Morrison wrote it up as a successful containment operation, crediting my quick thinking and expert knowledge of local conditions for preventing the fire from spreading to the burial caves. He never mentioned the supernatural elements, and I didn't correct him. Some things are better left out of official reports, but I knew the truth. And more importantly, I understood my responsibility now. I requested permanent assignment to White Top Mountain. Been here ever since, watching over the sacred ground, making sure the burial caves stay protected. The Cherokee spirits and I have an understanding now. I keep hikers and hunters away from the most sacred areas, and they help me spot fires before they can threaten the mountain. Tommy retired early, took a desk job down in the valley. He doesn't remember much about those 4 days, which is probably for the best. But sometimes, when the wind is blowing just right through the mountains, I see him look up toward White Top with an expression of profound respect. The old-timers in town nod knowingly when I tell them about strange things happening on the mountain. They've always known that some places are different, that the old powers never really left these hills. They just learned to coexist with them, to show the proper respect. I'm not the same man who climbed that tower back in October of 1978. 18 years of fighting fires had made me confident, maybe a little arrogant about my mastery over nature. But the Cherokee spirits taught me humility, showed me that we're all just temporary visitors in these ancient places. The radio still picks up Cherokee voices sometimes, especially during the changing seasons when the veil between worlds grows thin. But now they're friendly voices, old warriors sharing stories of hunts and battles, medicine men teaching me about the secret places on the mountain that need special protection. Other rangers ask me sometimes why I stay up here, why I don't take a promotion and move to an easier assignment. I tell them I like the solitude, the challenge of protecting one of Virginia's most remote areas. It's not really a lie, just not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I'm a guardian now, just like the Cherokee spirits who've watched over this mountain for centuries. We're partners in protecting something sacred, something that connects us to powers older than written history. And every morning when I climb up to the fire tower and look out over the Blue Ridge Mountains, I remember what my granddaddy used to say: respect the old places, boy. They'll teach you things you never knew you needed to learn. He was right about that. The mountains are good teachers, if you're willing to listen. Just make sure you're ready for the lessons they want to teach. Because once the old spirits mark you as one of their own, you belong to these mountains forever. And honestly, I can't think of anywhere else I'd rather be. My name is Michael Carpenter, but everybody calls me Mick. Been a park ranger for 20 years now, working the Point Pleasant area down in West Virginia where the Ohio River bends like a snake. People think being a ranger is all campfires and lost hikers, but out here in October 1966, my job is mostly checking on the old TNT plant grounds, where they used to make explosives during the war. The place gives most folks the creeps. Concrete igloos scattered through the woods like giant mushrooms, half buried and crumbling. During World War II, this whole area hummed with workers making ammunition. Now it's just me, the wildlife, and whatever kids are brave enough to come necking in the abandoned areas. I'm 44 years old, been through Korea, helped build the Silver Bridge that connects Point Pleasant to Ohio. My hands know the feel of good steel and bad steel, and my eyes can spot when something in the woods isn't right. 20 years of walking, these trails teaches you things you can't learn from books. This morning started like any other. Coffee at 5, check the radio, review my route. The leaves were turning that deep red color that comes just before they fall, and the air had that sharp bite that tells you winter's coming fast. I loaded my truck with the usual gear: first aid kit, radio, clipboard for reports, and my father's old binoculars that have never failed me. The TNT area covers about 2,500 acres of mixed woodland and clearing. Most people avoid it because of the old chemical smells that still seep from the ground, and the way sound travels funny between the concrete domes. But I've walked every inch of it, mapped every trail, and I know which structures are safe and which ones you shouldn't get close to. My first stop was always the main road that runs through the center of the area. Kids like to race cars there at night, tearing up the gravel and leaving beer bottles. But this morning, something felt different. The usual sounds were wrong. No bird calls, no squirrels chattering in the oak trees. Even the insects seemed to have gone quiet. I parked the truck and stepped out, listening. In 20 years, I'd learned to trust my gut when the woods went silent like this. It usually meant a big predator was around, maybe a black bear or a cougar passing through. But this silence felt deeper, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I walked toward the nearest concrete dome, checking for fresh tire tracks or signs of trespassers. The morning mist clung to the ground, making everything look soft and gray. My boots crunched on the fallen leaves, and I could smell that mix of decay and damp earth that comes with autumn. That's when I saw the first tracks. They were pressed deep into the soft mud near a drainage ditch, bigger than anything I'd ever seen before. Three-toed, like a giant bird, but each toe was as long as my hand. The stride between prints was at least 6 feet. I knelt down and measured, one with my fingers. 8 inches from tip to heel, and the claw marks at the end went down another 2 inches into the mud. I'd seen turkey vulture tracks, hawk tracks, even the occasional eagle. This wasn't any bird I knew. The depth of the impression meant whatever made it had to weigh at least as much as a grown man, probably more. But no bird that heavy could fly, and these tracks showed no sign of dragging or walking. They were spaced like something that had landed hard and taken off again. I took out my notebook and sketched the prints, measuring everything twice. In my reports, I always stuck to facts. What I saw, what I measured, what I could prove. But looking at those tracks in the early morning mist, I felt something I hadn't felt since Korea. The feeling that something was hunting and I might be the prey. The radio crackled in my truck. "Mick, you copy? This is dispatch." I walked back and picked up the handset. "This is Carpenter." "Go ahead. Got a call from some kids last night. Said they saw something big flying around the TNT area. Figured you should know." "What kind of big?" "They said it looked like a giant bird, but with red eyes." Kids were pretty shook up about it. I looked back at the tracks, then at the concrete domes rising from the mist like ancient burial mounds. "I'll check it out. Probably just an owl or something." "Copy that. Be careful out there, Mick." But as I hung up the radio, I knew this wasn't going to be just an owl. Those tracks belonged to something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist. And for the first time in 20 years of ranging these woods, I felt like I was the one being watched. I spent the rest of the morning following the track line through the woods. Whatever made those prints had moved in a straight line, ignoring trails and crashing through undergrowth like it didn't care about obstacles. Every few hundred yards, I'd find another set of landing marks, always the same pattern. 9. 3 deep gouges in the earth, and then nothing until the next touchdown point. The tracks led me deeper into the TNT area than I usually went, past the safer concrete domes and into the section where the Army had stored the more dangerous chemicals. Warning signs from 20 years ago still hung on rusted fence posts. The paint faded, but the skull and crossbones still clear enough. Here, the trees grew strange. Twisted branches, leaves that stayed green too long or died too early. The soil had a sick yellow tinge in places where the chemicals had leaked. Most animals avoided this section completely, which made the tracks even more puzzling. What kind of creature would choose to land in a poisoned wasteland? Around noon, I found something that stopped me cold. It was a car, or what was left of one. A blue Ford, maybe 5 years old, wrapped around a massive oak tree like someone had thrown it there. But the tree was 100 yards from the nearest road, and there were no tire tracks leading to it. The car looked like it had fallen from the sky. I approached carefully, checking for survivors. The driver's door hung open, and the seat was empty. No blood, no sign of struggle. The keys still dangled from the ignition. On the passenger seat, I found a wallet belonging to Tom Ayers, 22 years old, address in Gallipolis, Ohio. The weird thing was the damage. The roof was crushed in 4 places, each dent about the size of a basketball. But the crushing had come from above, not from hitting the tree. Looking at those dents, I could almost see the pattern, like something with enormous talons had grabbed the car from the air and squeezed. I radioed for backup and a tow truck, then secured the scene. While I waited, I walked a circle around the wreck, looking for any clue about what had happened. That's when I found the second set of tracks. These were human footprints, bare feet, leading away from the car toward the deeper woods. The stride was long and uneven, like someone running in panic. I followed them for about 50 yards before they just stopped. No sign of where the person had gone, no disturbance in the leaves ahead. It was like Tom Ayers had simply vanished in mid-step. The tow truck arrived an hour later, driven by Pete Morrison, who'd been pulling cars out of ditches around Point Pleasant for 15 years. He took one look at the Ford and whistled low. "How the hell did this get way out here, Mick? That's what I'm trying to figure out." Pete walked around the car, shaking his head. "Looks like something picked it up and dropped it. See these dents in the roof? That's not collision damage. That's pressure, like from a giant vise. You ever see anything like this before?" "Once. Back in '58, we had a tornado touchdown near Henderson. Found a pickup truck in a tree, about 20 feet off the ground. But there wasn't any tornado last night. Sky was clear as glass." After Pete winched the car onto his truck and drove away, I stood alone in the poisoned woods, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. 2 sets of tracks, one inhuman, one human. A car that had been dropped from the sky. A missing person who had disappeared without a trace. The sun was getting low, casting long shadows between the concrete domes. I should have headed back to the station, filed my report, let someone else worry about the mystery. But something kept me walking deeper into the TNT area, following the bare footprints until they vanished. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound like no bird I'd ever heard before. Low and rumbling, almost like a growl, but with a musical quality that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It started soft and built slowly, echoing off the concrete structures until the whole forest seemed to vibrate with it. I looked up through the canopy, searching for movement. The sound was coming from above, but I couldn't see anything except darkening sky and the first few stars beginning to show. Then the sound stopped, and the silence that followed was even worse. I was reaching for my radio when something huge passed overhead, blocking out the stars for just a moment. A shadow with wings that had to span 20 feet or more, moving without a sound now, gliding between the treetops like a nightmare-given form. My heart hammered against my ribs as I fumbled for my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, but whatever I'd seen was already gone. Just empty sky and the whisper of wind through the leaves. But on the ground at my feet, pressed fresh into the soft earth, was another 3-toed track. This one was still warm. I backed toward my truck, keeping the flashlight beam moving, checking every shadow. The rational part of my mind was already working on explanations. Big owl, trick of the light, airplane flying low. But my gut knew better. My gut knew I'd just seen something that shouldn't exist. Something that had been watching me as closely as I'd been tracking it. The drive back to town felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. Every time I checked the rearview mirror, I expected to see red eyes glowing in the darkness behind me. Every shadow looked like wings. Every telephone pole looked like a perch for something massive and hungry. When I finally pulled into the ranger station, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my pen to write the report. I stuck to the facts: abandoned car, missing person, unusual tracks. But I didn't mention the shadow or the sound or the feeling that something enormous had been studying me like a bug under a microscope. Some things don't belong in official reports. Some things you keep to yourself until you're sure you're not going crazy. But deep down, I already knew this was just the beginning. 3 days passed before I got the call about Bob Fletcher. Bob was a bridge inspector, worked for the State Highway Department, checking the Silver Bridge every month. Good man, steady worker, father of 2 little girls. He'd been out doing his regular inspection when something went wrong. They found his truck parked at the base of the bridge, driver's door open, safety harness still hanging from the passenger seat. His clipboard was on the ground, covered with notes about stress fractures and metal fatigue. But Bob was nowhere to be found. I met Sheriff Mills at the scene just after sunrise. The sheriff was a practical man who didn't believe in mysteries, but even he looked puzzled, staring at Bob's abandoned truck. "State boys called it in around midnight," Mills said. Bob's wife expected him home for dinner. When he didn't show, she drove out looking for him. I walked around the truck, looking for signs of struggle. Everything was neat and orderly, like Bob had just stepped away for a minute. His thermos was still warm, coffee half finished. His inspection tools were laid out on the tailgate in perfect rows. "What was he working on?" I asked. Mills showed me the clipboard. Bob's handwriting was small and precise, recording measurements and observations about the bridge structure. The last entry was dated yesterday at 4:30 p.m. Unusual stress patterns in main cable housing. Recommend immediate secondary inspection. I looked up at the Silver Bridge, stretching across the Ohio River. It was a beautiful piece of engineering, built back in 1928 when I was just a kid. The main cables gleamed silver in the morning sun, and traffic moved across it steady and smooth. Bob had been checking that bridge for 8 years and never found anything seriously wrong before. Did he say anything to his wife about problems with the bridge? I asked. Not a word. But look at this. Mills led me to the edge of the river where the bridge footings met the bank. In the soft mud, clear as day, were the same 3-toed tracks I'd been seeing around the TNT area. But these were bigger, deeper, and they led right to the water's edge. "You seen tracks like this before?" Mills asked. I nodded slowly. "Few times over at the TNT plant. Whatever's making them is big. Big enough to carry off a full-grown man?" The question hung in the air between us. We both knew what we were thinking, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud. Things like that didn't happen in Point Pleasant. People didn't just vanish without a trace. But as I stared at those tracks, I remembered the shadow I'd seen 3 nights ago, the sound that had made the whole forest vibrate. Something was out there, something that could grab a car and drop it in the woods, something that left tracks like a giant bird but moved through the darkness like a hunter. The radio in my truck crackled. All units. We have reports of a large flying object over the TNT area. Multiple witnesses." Mills and I looked at each other. "That's 5 miles from here," he said. "I know. But whatever made these tracks can cover 5 miles pretty quick." We drove to the TNT area together, following a convoy of police cars and emergency vehicles. When we arrived, we found about 20 people standing in the main clearing, all pointing up at the sky and talking at once. Sarah Chen, a local teacher, was the first to spot us. "Officers, thank God you're here. We all saw it plain as day." "Saw what?" Mills asked. "A giant bird, bigger than anything I've ever seen. It was circling the concrete domes, making this awful sound like metal scraping against metal." An older man stepped forward. "Wasn't no bird," he said firmly. "Birds don't have eyes like that. This thing had red eyes, glowing like coals. And when it looked at you, it felt like it could see right through you." More witnesses chimed in, all describing the same thing. Something massive with wings, red glowing eyes, and a presence that made everyone feel cold and afraid. It had circled the area for almost 10 minutes before flying off toward the river. "Which direction?" I asked. Sarah pointed south, toward the bridge. Mills and I exchanged looks. The bridge where Bob Fletcher had disappeared just hours ago. I spent the rest of the day interviewing witnesses and documenting their stories. Every account was remarkably similar, and these weren't hysterical teenagers or drunk hunters. These were teachers, factory workers, families with children, solid, reliable people who had no reason to make up stories about giant flying creatures. As the sun set, I found myself back at the TNT area alone, walking the perimeter with my flashlight. The other officers had gone home, satisfied that they'd taken enough statements to file a report. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening was far from over. I was checking the concrete dome where most witnesses said the creature had perched when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Bob? Bob Fletcher?" The man stumbling toward me looked like Bob, but something was wrong. His clothes were torn, his hair was white as snow, and his eyes had a vacant, 1,000-yard stare I'd seen on soldiers who'd been through too much combat. "Bob, where have you been? Everyone's looking for you." He stopped about 10 feet away and looked at me without recognition. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. It showed me things, he said. Terrible things. The bridge. The bridge is going to fall. What bridge? The Silver Bridge? Metal screaming, people falling, water turning red. His hands were shaking like leaves in a storm. It showed me the future, and it's all falling down. I reached for my radio to call for medical assistance, but Bob grabbed my arm with surprising strength. You have to believe me, he said urgently. The creature, it's not just hunting, it's warning. The bridge is going to collapse, and people are going to die. Lots of people. Before I could respond, that sound echoed through the forest again. The low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Bob's eyes went wide with terror. It's coming back, he whispered. It wants to show you too. The sound built to a crescendo, and something huge passed overhead, blocking out the stars. I looked up and saw it clearly for the first time. A massive humanoid figure, with wings like a bat and eyes that glowed red as fire. It perched on top of the nearest concrete dome and stared down at us with intelligence that was definitely not human. Bob collapsed to his knees, covering his eyes. Don't look at it directly, he whispered. Don't let it show you what it showed me. But I couldn't look away. Those red eyes held me like a magnet, and suddenly the world around me began to change. I saw flashes of the future. The Silver Bridge buckling and twisting, cars tumbling into the press, icy river, people screaming as the steel cables snapped like rubber bands. And then, as quickly as it had come, the vision ended. The creature spread its enormous wings and lifted off into the night, leaving us alone in the darkness. Bob was crying now, tears streaming down his face. 46 people, he said. 46 people are going to die, and nobody will believe us until it's too late. The phone calls started the next morning. First it was Sarah Chen, the teacher who'd witnessed the creature at the TNT area. She'd had nightmares all night, she said, dreams of the Silver Bridge collapsing during rush hour traffic. Then came 3 more witnesses from the sighting, all reporting the same vision of disaster. By noon, my office was full of people demanding answers I didn't have. How do you explain to rational adults that a giant winged creature was showing people glimpses of the future? How do you convince a town that their main bridge was going to collapse because a monster told you so? Sheriff Mills pulled me aside after the crowd cleared out. Mick, we got a problem. State Highway Department reviewed Bob Fletcher's inspection notes, and they're not happy. He found stress fractures in the main suspension system that should have been caught years ago. How bad is it? Bad enough that they're sending a full engineering team down from Columbus. But here's the thing, the fractures Bob documented, they're in places nobody would normally check. It's like he knew exactly where to look. I thought about Bob's terrified face in the darkness, his whispered warnings about metal screaming and people falling. What if he did know? What if something showed him where to look? Mills gave me a long, hard stare. You really believe that thing people saw can predict the future? I don't know what I believe anymore, but I know Bob Fletcher didn't go crazy overnight, and I know those stress fractures are real. That afternoon, I drove out to the Silver Bridge to watch the engineering team work. They had the whole span crawling with inspectors, checking every cable, every joint, every support beam. What they found made the lead engineer go pale. This bridge should have failed months ago, he told Mills and me. The main suspension cables are hanging by a thread. One good shock, one heavy load, and the whole thing comes down. How long to fix it? Mills asked. Fix it? Sheriff, this bridge needs to be completely rebuilt. We're talking about shutting down the main route between Ohio and West Virginia for at least 2 years. Mills shook his head. Can't do it. This bridge carries 4,000 cars a day. It's the economic lifeline for both sides of the river. Then you better pray nothing happens to stress those cables any further, because I'm telling you, this structure is a disaster waiting to happen. As the engineers packed up their equipment, I stayed behind, watching the evening traffic flow across the round bridge. Families heading home from work, kids in school buses, trucks carrying goods to market. All of them trusting that the steel beneath their wheels would hold for one more crossing. The sun was setting when I saw it again. The creature perched on the highest tower of the bridge, wings folded against its body, red eyes scanning the traffic below. From this distance, it looked almost like a gargoyle, a stone guardian watching over the river. But I knew it was real, and I knew it was waiting. I grabbed my binoculars and focused on the creature. Up close, it was even more terrifying. The body was humanoid but covered in dark fur or feathers. The wings were leathery like a bat's, with a span that had to be 20 feet or more. But it was the eyes that held me, intelligent, ancient, filled with a sadness that seemed older than the hills. The creature turned its head and looked directly at me, even though I was half a mile away. Suddenly, my mind was flooded with images. Again. But this time they were clearer, more detailed. I saw the exact moment of the bridge's collapse. December 15th, 1967. Rush hour traffic, the bridge packed with holiday shoppers. A single truck, carrying too much weight, hitting the roadway just as a gust of wind stressed the weakened cables. The catastrophic failure that would follow, steel screaming as it twisted apart. Cars tumbling into the freezing Ohio River. 46 people dying in less than 90 seconds. But this time, the vision showed me something else. A way to prevent it. The creature's voice echoed in my mind, not in words, but in pure understanding. It wasn't just showing me the disaster, it was showing me how to save those people. The truck that would trigger the collapse. The exact time and location. The warning signs that would appear just moments before the failure. When the vision ended, I was on my knees in the gravel parking lot, tears streaming down my face. The creature was gone, vanished, into the darkening sky. But its message remained burned into my memory. I had 13 months to convince people that the Silver Bridge was going to collapse on December 15th, 1967. 13 months to save 46 lives. 13 months to prove that sometimes the impossible is the only truth that matters. The drive back to town felt like a funeral procession. How do you warn people about a disaster that won't happen for more than a year? How do you convince engineers and politicians and ordinary citizens that a creature that shouldn't exist has shown you the future? But as I pulled into the ranger station, I realized the creature had given me something more valuable than just a warning. It had given me Bob Fletcher's inspection notes, the exact locations of the structural weaknesses, the technical evidence that could force the authorities to act. The creature wasn't just a harbinger of disaster, it was trying to prevent one. And somehow, I was going to help it succeed. 13 months is a long time to carry a secret that could save 46 lives. I started with the evidence Bob Fletcher had gathered during his final inspection. Working with the state engineering team, I helped document every stress fracture, every weakened cable, every sign that the Silver Bridge was living on borrowed time. Bob himself was transferred to a desk job after his mysterious disappearance, officially due to stress, but I knew the real reason. No one wanted an inspector who found problems in places he shouldn't have been looking. The fight to close the bridge took almost the full 13 months. Politicians worried about economic impact. Engineers argued about acceptable risk levels. The public complained about detours and delays. But slowly, steadily, the evidence mounted. Independent inspections confirmed Bob's findings. Computer models showed the catastrophic failure scenarios. Insurance companies began asking difficult questions. On December 14th, 1967, the Silver Bridge was finally closed to traffic pending major structural repairs. I spent that night at the bridge, sitting in my truck, watching the empty roadway that should have been packed with rush hour traffic. The creature appeared one final time, perching on the center tower like a silent guardian. This time, its presence felt different, peaceful, almost relieved. At exactly 5:04 p.m. on December 15th, the Silver Bridge collapsed. Even without traffic, the failure was spectacular and terrifying. The main suspension cables snapped like guitar strings, and the entire center span twisted into the Ohio River with a sound like the world ending. If the bridge had been open, if those 4,000 daily commuters had been crossing at rush hour, 46 people would have died, just as the creature had shown me. Instead, the only casualty was a single seagull that had been resting on the roadway. The investigations that followed focused on metal fatigue, design, flaws, and inadequate maintenance. No one mentioned the giant winged creature that had warned us, or the visions that had shown us exactly when and how the disaster would unfold. The official reports credited improved inspection procedures and computer modeling for identifying the structural problems in time. I never saw the creature again after that night. Whatever its purpose had been, it had accomplished its mission. The Mothman, as the newspapers eventually called it, vanished from Point Pleasant as suddenly as it had appeared. But the guilt never left me. In saving 46 lives, I'd learned something terrible about the nature of prediction and responsibility. The creature hadn't just shown me one possible future. It had shown me the weight of knowledge, the burden of being the only person who could prevent a disaster. Bob Fletcher retired early and moved to Florida with his family. The official story was that stress from the bridge collapse had affected his health, but I knew better. Bob had seen the same visions I had, felt the same crushing responsibility. Some knowledge is too heavy for one person to carry alone. I stayed on as a ranger for 3 more years, but the woods never felt the same. Every shadow looked like wings. Every strange sound made me wonder if the creature had returned with another warning. When I finally retired in 1970, I told people it was because I wanted to spend more time with my family. The truth was, I couldn't bear the possibility of seeing another disaster I might be powerless to prevent. The Silver Bridge was eventually rebuilt with modern engineering and safety systems. Point Pleasant became famous for the Mothman sightings, with tourists coming from all over the world to hear stories about the creature that had appeared just before the disaster. Most of them treated it like folklore, a local legend that made for good campfire stories. They never knew how close they came to witnessing one of 2014, the worst bridge collapses in American history. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about those red eyes and the intelligence behind them. Was the creature trying to save human lives, or was it simply documenting a disaster it knew was inevitable? Did it choose to appear to us, or were we chosen because we were the only ones capable of acting on its warnings? I never found answers to those questions. All I know is that 46 people went home to their families on December 15th, 1967, because a monster decided to trust a park ranger with the future. And sometimes, when the wind is just right and the shadows are deep enough, I still look up at the sky and wonder if it's watching over us still, waiting for the next disaster that only it can see coming. The Mothman's prey, it turned out, was never human beings. It was the disasters we create for ourselves and the blindness that keeps us from seeing them until it's too late. But sometimes, if we're very lucky, something watches over us in the darkness and gives us one last chance to save ourselves, even if we never understand why. My name is Robert Fairfax, but folks around Grafton just call me Bobby. I've been working as a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 16 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these West Virginia mountains could throw at me. Bears, meth labs, lost hikers, drunk hunters, you name it. But what happened to me in September of 1987 changed everything I thought I knew about what lives in these woods. I'm 41 years old, born and raised right here in Braxton County. My daddy worked the coal mines before they shut down, and my granddaddy before him. The Fairfax name goes back 3 generations in these parts. I know every trail, every old mining road, and every abandoned shaft from here to Webster Springs. That's why when weird stuff started happening around the old Braxton County mine site, they sent me to check it out. The call came in on a Tuesday evening. I was just finishing my rounds near the Sutton Lake area when dispatch crackled through my radio. "Bobby, you copy?" "Go ahead, Sarah." "Got reports of strange lights over the old mine site again. 3rd time this week. Sheriff's Department wants us to take a look, make sure it's not some kids messing around with fireworks or something." I sighed and looked at my watch. 7:30. And I was supposed to be heading home to Mary and the kids. But duty calls, especially when it involves potential fire hazards in my forest. "Copy that. I'll swing by and take a look." The old Braxton County mine site sits about 12 miles northeast of Grafton, up in the hills where the forest has slowly reclaimed what used to be a bustling coal operation. When the mine closed in 1962, they just left everything: the equipment, the buildings, even some of the rail cars. Nature's been taking it back ever since, but you can still see the scars. Great big slag heaps covered in scrub brush, a few concrete foundations poking through the weeds, and that old tipple tower standing like a skeleton against the sky. Most folks avoid the place. There's something about abandoned industrial sites that makes people nervous, especially at night. Plus, some of the old shafts aren't properly sealed, and we've had trouble with kids falling into them over the years. The county put up signs and barriers, but you know how that goes. As I drove my pickup truck up the winding dirt road that used to service the mine, I couldn't shake a weird feeling that had been growing stronger all week. It started small, just little things that didn't feel right. The local wildlife had been acting strange. Deer weren't following their usual patterns. Birds were flying in confused circles. Even my dog Rusty, who usually loves riding along on patrols, had been refusing to get in the truck when I headed toward this area. The road got rougher as I climbed higher into the hills. My headlights cut through the gathering darkness, picking out the ghostly shapes of rusted mining equipment scattered among the trees. An old conveyor belt stretched into the shadows like the spine of some long-dead dinosaur. The September air was crisp and clear, with a bright harvest moon rising over the ridgeline. I parked near the old office building, a squat concrete structure with broken windows and a roof that was slowly caving in. The silence was complete. No insects, no night birds, nothing. Even for a place like this, the quiet felt wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward where the report said people had seen the lights. According to the witnesses, the strange glow always appeared near the old mine entrance, the one they'd sealed with concrete back in the 70s. As I walked, my boots crunched on broken glass and scattered pieces of coal. That's when I first noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The ground around the sealed mine entrance was different. The weeds and small trees that had been growing there for years were gone, not cut down or burned, but gone. Like they'd just vanished. In their place was bare earth in a perfect circle, about 30 feet across. I knelt down and touched the soil with my gloved hand. It was warm, not hot, but definitely warmer than it should have been on a cool September evening. And there was something else, a faint humming sound, so low I felt it more than heard it. Standing up, I played my flashlight beam around the circle. The edge was perfectly defined, like someone had used a giant compass to draw it. Inside the circle, nothing grew. Outside it, the vegetation was normal, even healthy-looking. "What the hell?" I muttered to myself. That's when my radio started crackling with static. I tried to call dispatch, but all I got was white noise. Then my flashlight began to flicker. I smacked it a couple times, figuring the batteries were getting low, but the beam kept getting dimmer. A branch snapped somewhere behind me. I spun around, my heart jumping. The forest around the mine site was thick with second-growth timber. Maples, oaks, and pines that had sprouted up after the mining company cleared out. Plenty of places for something to hide. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" Nothing but that strange, low humming. I checked my watch. 8:45 p.m. Still plenty of time to get home at a reasonable hour if I wrap this up quick. I decided to take a closer look at the sealed mine entrance, document what I'd found, and get out of there. Something about this place was making my skin crawl. The sealed mine entrance was built right into the hillside, with thick concrete blocking what used to be the main shaft. The concrete was old and stained, covered with moss and small cracks from years of freeze-thaw cycles. But as I got closer, I could see something that made me stop dead in my tracks. The concrete was warm. Not just warm, it was actually hot to the touch. And there were marks on it, strange symbols that looked like they'd been burned into the surface. The marks were fresh, still glowing faintly red around the edges. I'd never seen anything like them. They weren't letters or numbers, at least not from any language I knew. They looked almost alien, like circuit patterns, but organic somehow. The humming sound was stronger here, and I could feel it in my bones. My flashlight died completely. I smacked it again, harder this time, and got nothing. 16 years of ranger work, and I'd never had equipment failure like this. The radio was still nothing but static, and now I was standing in near total darkness except for the moonlight filtering through the trees. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were coming from somewhere up the hillside, above the mine entrance. Slow, deliberate steps that didn't sound quite right. Too heavy, for one thing. Each footfall made a deep thud that I could feel through the ground, and they were getting closer. I fumbled for the spare flashlight on my belt, but my hands were shaking now. The footsteps stopped. In the sudden silence, I became aware of a new sound. A low, mechanical whirring, like an electric motor spinning up. And then I saw it. A light appeared among the trees above me. Not the warm yellow glow of a flashlight or lantern, but a cold blue-white radiance that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was moving, floating through the forest without any visible source. As it got closer, I could make out details that made my mind struggle to process what I was seeing. The light was attached to something, a figure that stood at least 10 feet tall. Its body seemed to be made of dark metal, with joints and seams like some kind of machine. But it moved too smoothly, too organically, to be purely mechanical. The head was the worst part. It was shaped like a spade or an ace of clubs, with two burning red eyes that fixed on me with obvious intelligence. The thing was floating about 3 feet off the ground, moving between the trees without disturbing a single branch. I tried to run. My legs wouldn't move. It was like being in a nightmare where you're trying to escape but your body won't obey. I stood there, frozen, as the creature drifted closer. The humming sound grew louder, and I realized it was coming from the thing itself. When it was about 20 feet away, it stopped. Those red eyes studied me, and I had the horrible feeling that it was looking inside my head somehow, reading my thoughts like pages in a book. The air around it shimmered with heat waves, and I could smell something sharp and metallic, like hot copper. Then it spoke. Not with words, exactly, but I heard its voice inside my skull. The sound was like metal scraping against stone, but somehow I understood it perfectly. You should not be here, human. I wanted to explain that I was just doing my job, that I'd leave right away and never come back, but I couldn't make my mouth work. All I could do was stand there and stare at this impossible thing that shouldn't exist. The creature tilted its head, studying me. You have seen the markings. You have felt the heat. Your kind always investigates what it does not understand. More lights appeared in the forest around us. Smaller ones, but with that same cold, blue-white glow. I realized there were more of these things, watching from the shadows. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. There was an incident here, the creature continued, its mental voice echoing in my head. Equipment was damaged. Repairs are required. Your presence complicates this work. Equipment? What kind of equipment could these things possibly have hidden in an abandoned coal mine? As if reading my thoughts, and maybe it was, the creature gestured toward the sealed mine entrance. The concrete began to glow, and then it simply dissolved. Like it was made of sugar and someone had poured water on it. Behind, where the concrete had been, I could see a tunnel that definitely hadn't been there when they sealed the mine 25 years ago. The tunnel walls were smooth and metallic, with that same blue-white light running along them in patterns that hurt to look at. Whatever was down there, it wasn't from around here. Witnesses to our work cannot be permitted, the creature said. That broke the paralysis. I turned and ran. My legs felt like jelly, but somehow I managed to stumble back toward where I'd parked my truck. Behind me, I could hear that mechanical whirring getting louder, and more lights were appearing in the forest. Whatever these things were, they were following me. I crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at my uniform and face. My truck was only 100 yards away, but it felt like miles. Every step, I expected to feel one of those energy beams hit me, or claws, or whatever weapons these creatures might have. I reached the truck and fumbled for my keys, hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. The engine turned over on the first try, thank God for small favors, and I threw it in reverse, backing away from the mine site as fast as I dared on the narrow dirt road. In my rearview mirror, I could see lights moving among the trees. They seemed to be getting brighter, more numerous. Whatever I'd stumbled into, it was bigger than just one creature. I made it about half a mile down the mountain before my engine died. The truck rolled to a stop on the dirt road, engine ticking as it cooled. I turned the key again and again, but got nothing. Not even a click from the starter. It was like the whole electrical system had just given up. I sat there in the dark, trying to think. My radio was still dead. My flashlights wouldn't work. Even my digital watch had stopped. It was like being near those creatures had fried every piece of electronic equipment I had. Through the windshield, I could see lights moving in the forest above me. They were spread out now, maybe a dozen of them, working in some kind of pattern, searching for me. I had to get out of there, but it was 12 miles back to town on foot, mostly through forest. And those things could fly. If they wanted to find me, they would. Then I remembered the old railroad tunnel. Back when the mine was operating, they'd built a narrow-gauge railroad to haul coal down to the main line near Grafton. The tracks were long gone, but the tunnels they'd blasted through the hills were still there. Most people had forgotten about them, but I'd explored them as a kid. There was one about a quarter mile from where my truck had died, hidden behind a screen of rhododendron bushes. I grabbed my spare radio from the glove compartment. Maybe it would work once I got some distance from this place and started walking. The moon was bright enough to see by, but every shadow looked like it might be hiding one of those, or creatures. I found the tunnel entrance right where I remembered it. The opening was maybe 6 feet high and just wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. Rails would have run down the center, but those had been pulled up decades ago, leaving just the wooden ties rotting into the ground. I pushed through the rhododendron screen and stepped into the tunnel. The temperature dropped immediately. It was probably 20 degrees cooler in there. And quiet. The sound of my footsteps echoed off the stone walls, but at least that mechanical humming was gone. The tunnel stretched ahead into complete darkness. I knew it ran for about half a mile, coming out near Beaver Creek. From there, I could follow the creek down to the county road and flag down a car. It would take most of the night, but it beat trying to outrun flying creatures in the open forest. I'd made it maybe 200 yards into the tunnel when I heard voices. They were coming from ahead of me, deeper in the tunnel. Human voices, speaking in urgent whispers. I stopped and listened, trying to make out words. Told you we shouldn't have come up here. Just wanted to see the lights. Something's following us. Other people were in the tunnel. That meant I wasn't the only one who'd seen the creatures. But it also meant those things were hunting more than just me. I moved forward carefully, feeling my way along the tunnel wall. The voices got clearer as I approached. Jenny, we gotta keep moving. Those things are gonna find us. My ankles twisted. I can't walk much further. Then I'll carry you. We're not stopping here. I could see them now, silhouetted against the faint moonlight coming through the far end of the tunnel. 2 people, a man and a woman, both young from the sound of their voices. The woman was limping badly. Hey, I called out softly. Don't be scared. I'm a forest ranger. They spun around, the man stepping protectively in front of the woman. Who's there? He demanded. Ranger Bobby Fairfax. I'm trying to get away from those things too. They relaxed slightly. As I got closer, I could see they were both in their 20s, dressed for hiking. The woman's face was pale with pain, and the man looked like he'd been running hard. Thank God, the woman said. I'm Jenny Morrison. This is my boyfriend Dave Chen. We were camping up near the mine site when those things showed up. What did you see? I asked. Dave shook his head. I don't even know how to describe it. Lights in the sky, then these tall creatures that looked like robots or something. They vaporized our tent, our car, everything. Just pointed some kind of weapon at it and it disappeared. Vaporized? That was a word I didn't want to hear. We've been running for 2 hours, Jenny added. They keep finding us somehow. That's when I noticed the light growing brighter behind us. Move, I said. Now. We started down the tunnel as fast as Jenny could manage, Dave supporting most of her weight, but the light was gaining on us, and I could hear that mechanical humming echoing off the tunnel walls. There's a side passage about 50 yards ahead, I said. It's an old air shaft. We can hide there. But we didn't make it 50 yards. The light suddenly blazed so bright it hurt to look at, and the humming became a roar. I turned around and saw one of the creatures floating into the tunnel entrance, its red eyes sweeping back and forth like searchlights. Run, I whispered. Dave tried to carry Jenny, but she stumbled and fell. The creature's eyes fixed on us immediately. Witnesses? It said in that horrible mental voice. Elimination required. The air between us began to shimmer, and I smelled that hot copper smell again. Some kind of energy was building up, focusing on us. Get behind me, I told Dave and Jenny, though I had no idea what I could do against something like this. The creature raised what might have been an arm, and the shimmer in the air intensified. Whatever was about to happen, it was going to be bad. That's when the tunnel ceiling collapsed. A section of old mining timber gave way with a thunderous crash, bringing down tons of rock and debris between us and the creature. Dust filled the air, and for a moment I couldn't see anything. When the dust settled, we were cut off from the creature, but also trapped. The side passage I'd mentioned was on the other side of the cave-in. "Are you hurt?" I asked Jenny and Dave. They were shaken up, but okay. Jenny's ankle was still twisted, but no new injuries. "What now?" Dave asked. I looked at the pile of rock blocking our escape route. It would take heavy equipment to clear it, and we didn't have that kind of time. The creatures would find another way to get to us. "There's another passage," I said, though I wasn't sure I remembered it correctly. "An old drainage tunnel that connects to this one. It's been sealed for years, but maybe we can break through." It was our only chance. Behind us, I could hear the creatures working to clear the cave-in. They had tools, or powers, that made quick work of moving rock. We had maybe 20 minutes before they broke through. I led Dave and Jenny deeper into the tunnel, searching for the drainage passage I hoped was still there. Our lives depended on my memory of exploring these tunnels 30 years ago as a kid, and I could hear more lights coming from the other end of the tunnel. The drainage tunnel was exactly where I remembered it, sealed with a rusted metal grate that had kept water from flooding the main railroad passage. But 30 years of moisture had done its work. When Dave and I put our shoulders against it, the old metal gave way with a screech that echoed through the tunnels. "Where does this lead?" Jenny whispered as we helped her through the opening. "Down to Beaver Creek," I said, "maybe a quarter mile." The drainage tunnel was smaller than the railroad passage, barely wide enough for one person. We had to move single file, with me leading and Dave helping Jenny from behind. The floor was slick with decades of mineral deposits, and more than once we had to catch ourselves from falling. Behind us, the sounds of the creatures clearing the cave-in grew louder. They were making progress faster than I'd hoped. "Ranger Fairfax," Jenny said as we moved through the tunnel. "What are those things? Where did they come from?" I'd been thinking about that same question for the last hour. "I don't know for sure," I said. "But I think they've been here longer than we realized." The tunnel began to slope downward more steeply, and I could hear running water ahead. We were getting close to the creek. Maybe close enough to escape. That's when Dave's foot went through a rotten board. He fell hard, his leg disappearing up to the knee, through what used to be a support plank over a side drain. When he tried to pull himself out, he screamed. "My leg's caught," he gasped. "Something's got my leg." I knelt down beside him and shined my phone's screen down through the hole. Miraculously, it had started working again the further we got from the creatures. What I saw made my stomach turn. Dave's leg was caught in some kind of machinery, gears and pistons that definitely weren't part of the original mine construction. They were holding his leg in a grip that was slowly tightening. "What the hell is that?" Dave asked, his face pale with pain. Before I could answer, lights appeared in the drainage tunnel behind us. The creatures had broken through. "You have to leave me," Dave said. "Get Jenny out of here." "No way," Jenny said firmly. "We're not leaving anyone." I looked at the machinery holding Dave's leg, then at the approaching lights. We had maybe 2 minutes before the creatures reached us. That's when I noticed something about the machinery. It had the same symbols burned into it that I'd seen on the mine entrance. And it was warm to the touch, just like everything else connected to these creatures. It's not a trap, I realized. It's their equipment, part of whatever they've got hidden down here. I pressed my hands against the warm metal, feeling for some kind of release mechanism. The symbols began to glow brighter under my touch, and suddenly I could hear voices, not the creature's mental communication, but human voices. Voices from the past. Ground control. This is Survey Team 7. We've found it. The crash site is bigger than we thought. -7. Maintain radio silence. This is now a classified operation. There are bodies here, Control. But they're not human. We need immediate backup. The voices faded, but I understood. These creatures, this equipment, it had been here since the 1950 seconds. Hidden in the old mine, workings, covered up by the government. And now something had gone wrong with their concealment. "I can get you out," I told Dave, "but we need to move fast." I found what felt like a release switch and pressed it. The machinery loosened its grip with a pneumatic hiss, and Dave pulled his leg free. It was badly bruised, but not broken. The lights were getting brighter behind us. We stumbled toward the sound of running water, supporting each other as best we could. The tunnel opened into a natural cave where Beaver Creek ran through on its way down the mountain. Moonlight streamed in through an opening about 10 feet above the water level. "Can you swim?" I asked Jenny and Dave. They both nodded. "The creek flows down to the county road. It's cold and fast, but it's our best chance." We slipped into the water just as the first creature entered the cave behind us. The current grabbed us immediately, pulling us downstream faster than I'd expected. The water was shockingly cold, but it carried us away from the lights and that terrible humming. I managed to grab onto a fallen tree about 100 yards downstream and help Dave and Jenny get to shore. We were all shivering, but we were alive. "The county road's just ahead," I said. "We can flag down a car and get to town." But as we climbed up the bank, I saw more lights in the sky. The creatures weren't giving up. They were spreading out, searching the entire area. "They're not going to let us go," Jenny said, voicing what we were all thinking. "Why?" Dave asked. "What do they think we're going to do? Who would believe us?" That was the question that had been bothering me too. Why were they so determined to eliminate witnesses? What were they hiding that was worth killing for? I was about to find out. A light appeared directly above us, and one of the creatures descended from the sky. This one was different from the others, larger, with more complex markings on its metallic body. When it spoke, its mental voice was clearer, more authoritative. "You have accessed the archive systems," it said, looking directly at me. "You have heard the recordings. This cannot be permitted." Archive systems. The machinery in the tunnel hadn't been a trap. It had been some kind of data storage device, and I'd accidentally activated it. "What happened here?" I asked. "What are you hiding?" The creature tilted its spade-shaped head. "In your year 1952, our vessel suffered catastrophic failure. Emergency landing was required. Your government found us, made agreements. We repair our ship, they conceal our presence. But repairs have taken longer than anticipated. 35 years. These things had been hiding under our mountain for 35 years. Why kill us?" Jenny asked. "We're nobody. We don't matter. Agreement stipulates no civilian witnesses. Your government demands this. We comply." Our own government. They knew about these creatures and had been covering it up for decades. And part of that cover-up was making sure people like us disappeared. "The repairs are nearly complete," the creature continued. "Soon we depart. But first, all witnesses must be eliminated." It raised its arm, and that deadly shimmer began to build in the air. I looked at Dave and Jenny, saw the terror in their eyes, and made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "Run," I whispered. Then I tackled the creature. I don't know what I expected when I hit that creature. Maybe I thought it would be light, since it could fly, or maybe I thought it would be so solid I'd just bounce off. What I didn't expect was the electric shock that ran through my body the moment I made contact. It was like grabbing a live power line. Every muscle in my body seized up, and I could taste copper in my mouth. But somehow, the tackle worked. The creature and I went down together in a tangle of metal limbs and human desperation. The energy beam it had been charging up fired wild, vaporizing a section of creek bank instead of Dave and Jenny. I heard them running through the underbrush, crashing toward the county road. At least they had a chance now. The creature threw me off easily, but those few seconds had been enough. It rose back into the air, red eyes blazing with what might have been anger. "Interference will not be tolerated," it said. I rolled toward the creek as another energy beam seared the ground where I'd been lying. The smell of burnt earth and superheated rock filled the air. If one of those beams hit me directly, there wouldn't be enough left to bury. More creatures were arriving, their lights converging on our position. I had maybe seconds before they surrounded me completely. I dove into Beaver Creek. The current grabbed me again, pulling me underwater and downstream. Above the surface, I could see lights sweeping back and forth, searching. But the water seemed to interfere with their ability to track me. Maybe it was the mineral content, or maybe they just hadn't expected someone to use the creek as an escape route. I let the current carry me for what felt like miles, only surfacing to breathe when I was sure no lights were visible above. By the time I finally dragged myself onto shore, I was hypothermic and barely conscious, but I was alive. The county road was right where it should be. I stumbled onto the asphalt just as a West Virginia State Police cruiser came around the bend. The trooper who picked me up said I was babbling about flying robots and underground bases, but he got me to the hospital anyway. They treated me for exposure and shock. The official report said I'd gotten lost during a routine patrol and spent the night in the woods. My truck was found the next morning, engine flooded from the overnight rain. Electrical problems from water damage, the mechanic said. Dave and Jenny never made it to the county road. The search lasted 3 days. They found Jenny's jacket hanging from a tree branch about a mile from where I'd last seen them. Dave's wallet was discovered near an old mine shaft, contents scattered by animals. The official conclusion was that they'd fallen into one of the abandoned mines while trying to find help. I knew better. I tried to tell the truth. I filed reports with the Forest Service, the county sheriff, even the FBI. But without Dave and Jenny to back up my story, and with my truck's electrical system clearly damaged by water, everyone assumed I'd suffered some kind of breakdown. Too many years in the woods, they said. Stress of the job. They gave me a medical leave and suggested I might want to consider early retirement. I went back to the mine site once, about a month later. The concrete seal was back in place, looking like it had never been disturbed. The circular area where the vegetation had been burned away was covered with fresh grass seed. Even the strange symbols were gone, sandblasted off the concrete surface. Official records show that a hazmat team cleaned up contaminated soil at the site in October 1987. Chemical residue from the old mining operation, according to the paperwork. The area was declared safe for public access. But I still drive up there sometimes, especially during the new moon when the nights are darkest. And sometimes, not every time, but often enough to keep me coming back. I see lights moving among the trees. Blue-white lights that don't belong to any aircraft or ground vehicle. The repairs are still ongoing, apparently. I never did take early retirement. Stayed on with the Forest Service for another 8 years, until my real retirement in 1995. But I never worked the night shift again. And I made sure my replacement knew to stay away from the old mine sites when people reported strange lights. Some reports are best left uninvestigated. Mary asked me once why I kept going, back to that place. Why I couldn't just let it go and move on with my life. I told her it was because Dave and Jenny deserved to have someone remember what really happened to them. But that's only part of the truth. The real reason is simpler and more selfish than that. I need to know when they're finally leaving, because until they do, nobody in these mountains is really safe. And the next time some young couple goes camping near the wrong mine site, or some curious hiker follows strange lights into the forest, there might not be anyone around who knows what they're really dealing with. The Flatwoods Monster was just the beginning. What's hidden in the hills around Grafton is bigger, older, and more dangerous than anything people suspected back in 1952, and our government has been helping to keep it secret for over 30 years. But secrets have a way of getting out eventually. I'm 63 years old now, and my memory isn't what it used to be. But I remember every detail of that night in September 1987. Every sound, every smell, every moment of pure terror when I realized that we're not alone in this universe, and that the things sharing it with us don't particularly care about our survival. If you're ever driving through Braxton County and you see lights in the sky that don't move like normal aircraft, my advice is simple. Keep driving. Don't stop to investigate. Don't try to get a closer look. Some things are better left undisturbed, and some secrets are guarded by things that ain't from here. My name is Catherine Drummond, but everyone calls me Kate. I've been a park ranger for 14 years now, working the backcountry of Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. In all that time, doing over 200 rescues, I never lost anyone, not once, until Witch Hollow. People think being a ranger is all about giving directions and checking camping permits. They don't know about the real work. Pulling hypothermic hikers off mountainsides in blizzards, finding lost kids before they freeze to death, carrying broken bones down miles of rocky trail. I'm good at what I do. Real good. I've got wilderness medicine training, mountain climbing certificates, and enough winter survival knowledge to keep people alive when the mountains try to kill them. That's why they sent me after the Hendricks family. February 1989 was brutal cold, even for West Virginia winters. We had 3 feet of snow on the ground and temperatures that hadn't climbed above zero in 2 weeks. The Hendricks, mom, dad, and 3 kids aged 8 to 16, had gone into Witch Hollow for a winter camping trip. They were supposed to be back Tuesday. By Friday, we knew something was wrong. Witch Hollow sits deep in the forest, 25 miles from the nearest road. You can only get there on foot, following old logging trails that wind through valleys most people never see. The place has a reputation. Back in the 1700s, they say there were witch trials there, people starving through hard winters and turning on each other. Local folks avoid it, especially in winter. But I don't believe in that stuff. 14 years in these mountains taught me that people die from cold, exhaustion, and bad decisions. Not from ghosts or curses or whatever stories people tell around campfires. The Hendricks family was just lost or hurt somewhere in that valley, and it was my job to bring them home. I started out before dawn on Saturday, snowshoes strapped on, emergency pack loaded with medical supplies, food, and winter gear. The trail to Witch Hollow follows Cranberry Creek for the first 10 miles, then climbs through dense hemlock forest that blocks out most of the sky. Ancient trees, some of them 4 feet thick, covered in snow and ice, beautiful in its way, but deadly quiet. The deeper I went, the colder it got. That should have been my first warning. By noon, I was breathing vapor clouds with every breath, and my water bottles were starting to freeze despite being inside my jacket. The thermometer on my pack read -15, which was wrong. Weather Service had called for -5 in the valleys. Equipment malfunction, I figured. Cold does funny things to electronics. I found their first campsite around 2 o'clock. The Hendricks had picked a good spot, flat ground near the creek, protected by a ring of big hemlocks. But something was off. The tent was still standing, but it looked wrong. Collapsed in places, with dark stains on the snow around it. Not dark like mud or pine needles, dark like old blood. I called out as I approached. "Hello, Park Service. Is anyone here?" No answer. Just the wind through the trees, making them creak like old bones. The tent zipper was ripped open from the inside. Long tears in the fabric, like someone had clawed their way out in a panic. Inside, sleeping bags were shredded, camping gear scattered everywhere. Their food was gone, but not like bears had gotten to it. Bears make a mess, tear everything apart. This looked more organized. Purposeful. I found the first bones 20 feet away. Small ones, like from a rabbit or squirrel. They were arranged in a neat circle around the cold remains of their campfire. Each bone had been gnawed clean, cracked open for the marrow. The Hendricks had kids with them. Maybe one of them had been playing with animal bones they found. Kids do weird stuff when they're bored. But these bones were fresh. And there weren't any animal. Tracks in the snow, except mine. I took photos, made notes, tried to call it in on my radio. Nothing but static. Satellite phone was dead too. No signal this deep in the valley. Standard procedure was to mark the site and continue searching for the missing family. They'd obviously left this camp, probably spooked by something. I found their trail heading deeper into Witch Hollow. 5 sets of footprints in the snow, moving fast. No orderly hiking formation like you'd expect from an experienced family. These tracks wandered, crossed over each other, sometimes veered off the trail entirely before coming back. Like they'd been confused, disoriented, or running from something. The prints led me deeper into the valley, where the trees grew thicker and the shadows lasted all day. Every step I took, the air got colder. My breath came in sharp puffs that seemed to hang in the air longer than they should. The snow under my snowshoes made different sounds here, not the usual crunch, but something softer, almost wet. That's when I started to hear the sounds. Faint at first, like wind through the branches. But wind doesn't whisper. Wind doesn't sound like voices calling from somewhere far away, saying words I couldn't quite make out. I stopped every few minutes to listen, telling myself it was just the mountain playing tricks. Cold air moves differently through valleys. Sound carries strangely when everything's frozen. There are logical explanations for everything if you know enough about wilderness survival. But 14 years in these mountains, and I'd never heard anything like the sounds coming from deeper in Witch Hollow. The second campsite was worse. I found it just as the sun was starting to set, painting the snow pink and orange through the trees. The Hendricks had tried to make shelter against a limestone cliff face, using fallen branches and their torn tent fabric. Smart thinking, Get your back against something solid, block the wind. But something had gotten to them anyway. The shelter was destroyed, not collapsed from snow weight or wind damage. Destroyed from the inside, like something had exploded outward. Branches were scattered in all directions, some of them snapped in half despite being thick as my arm. The tent fabric hung in shreds from nearby trees, too high up for people to have put it there. I found Tom Hendricks 30 feet away. He was frozen solid, sitting upright against a tree like he'd just decided to take a rest. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. His face was blue-white with frostbite, but that wasn't what killed him. Something had taken bites out of his arms and legs. Clean bites, like from human teeth, but bigger. Much bigger. The weird part was how he looked peaceful. No signs of struggle, no defensive wounds on his hands. Like he'd just sat down and let whatever it was eat pieces of him while he froze to death. I checked for a pulse anyway, standard procedure. But Tom Hendricks had been dead for at least 2 days. His body was hard as wood, clothes frozen to his skin. I couldn't move him, couldn't examine him properly. All I could do was document the scene and keep looking for his wife and kids. That's when I noticed my hands were shaking. Not from cold. I was dressed for sub-zero weather and knew how to stay warm. This was something else, a tremor that started in my fingers and worked its way up my arms. My stomach felt empty, hollow, despite eating energy bars all day. I was hungry in a way I'd never felt before. Not normal hunger, but something deeper. Something that made me look at Tom Hendricks' frozen body and think about how much meat was on his bones. I forced myself to turn away, made myself focus on the tracks leading away from the shelter. 4 sets now instead of 5. Sarah Hendricks and her 3 kids, moving erratically through the snow. Their trail led toward a series of limestone caves I knew were carved into the cliff face about a 1/4 mile ahead. The hunger got worse as I followed their tracks. My mouth started watering, and I caught myself wondering what fresh meat would taste like after days of energy bars and trail mix. The thoughts came from nowhere, invasive and wrong. I'd been a vegetarian for 6 years, ever since my divorce. The idea of eating meat, especially raw meat, should have disgusted me. Instead, it made my stomach growl. I stopped to eat something, thinking low blood sugar was messing with my head. The energy bar tasted like cardboard. My body wanted something else, something warm and red and fresh. I bit down hard on my tongue, using the pain to clear my thoughts. Focus, Kate. Find the family. Get them out of here. The caves were old, carved out by underground streams over thousands of years. Local geology surveys said some of them went back into the mountain for miles, connecting to underground river systems. Perfect place to get lost, forever. Perfect place to freeze to death in the dark. I found signs of the family at the entrance to the largest cave. More torn fabric, scattered gear, drops of something dark frozen in the snow. The tracks went inside, but they were strange now. Sometimes they looked like normal boot prints. Sometimes they looked longer, with what might have been claw marks at the front. I clicked on my headlamp and followed them into the cave. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees as soon as I stepped inside. My breath came out in clouds so thick I could barely see through them. The cave walls were covered in a thin layer of ice that reflected my headlamp beam in weird patterns. Everything sparkled and shifted like I was walking through a hall of mirrors. 50 feet in, I found Sarah Hendricks' jacket. It was torn to pieces, covered in stains that looked black in my headlamp but probably weren't. A few feet further, one of the kids' backpacks. Then a boot. Then another boot, smaller. From one of the younger children. The trail of belongings led deeper into the cave, toward chambers that went back into the mountain where no light had ever reached. I should have turned around then, called for backup, waited for a full search team with proper equipment. Standard procedure for cave rescues. But I could hear something ahead in the darkness. Soft sounds, like someone eating. Wet, tearing noises that echoed off the cave walls. And underneath that, whispers. Human voices, speaking words I couldn't understand. Words that made my empty stomach clench with hunger. I turned off my headlamp and listened in the complete darkness. The eating sounds continued, along with what might have been quiet sobbing. Someone was alive in there. Someone needed help. I clicked the light back on and kept going deeper. The cave opened into a larger chamber about 100 feet from the entrance. My headlamp beam swept across limestone formations that looked like frozen waterfalls, across pools of ice that might have been underground streams, and across the Hendricks family. What was left of them? They were sitting in a circle around a pile of bones, human bones, gnawed clean and cracked open. Sarah Hendricks looked up when my light hit her face. Her lips were stained dark, her eyes reflecting my headlamp like an animal's. She was chewing something. "Help us," she whispered. Her voice was wrong, distorted, like it was coming from somewhere else. "We're so hungry." The three kids were there too, but I almost didn't recognize them. They'd lost weight, a lot of weight, like they'd been starving for weeks instead of days. Their faces were gaunt, eyes sunken deep in their skulls. The youngest, 8-year-old Emma, was gnawing on what looked like a human arm bone. "We found him," Sarah said, gesturing to the pile of bones between them. "We found Daddy, and he told us to eat. Said we needed to eat to stay warm." But I'd seen Tom, Hendricks frozen against that tree. These bones were older, yellowed with age. Someone else had died in this cave, maybe years ago, maybe decades. "We're not hungry anymore," the 16-year-old Jake said with a smile that showed teeth stained black. "We're never going to be hungry again." That's when I realized the whispers weren't coming from the family. They were coming from somewhere deeper in the cave, from chambers that stretched back into the mountain. Voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize, telling me about the taste of fresh meat, about the joy of never being hungry again. My stomach cramped with emptiness. The energy bars in my pack suddenly seemed pathetic, insufficient. I looked at the Hendricks family sitting around their pile of bones, and for just a moment, I understood. They'd found the answer to hunger. They'd found a way to be satisfied forever. I took a step toward them, toward the bones they were sharing. Then my radio crackled to life. "Ranger Drummond, this is base. What's your status?" "Over." The voice from the outside world snapped me back to reality. I grabbed the radio with shaking hands, backed away from the family and their meal. "Base, this is Drummond. I found them. I found the Hendricks family. But something's wrong here. Something's very wrong." The radio hissed with static. When the voice came back, it was faint, almost lost in interference. "Copy that, Drummond. What's your location? We're sending backup." But as I gave them my coordinates, I could see the Hendricks family watching me. Their eyes reflected my headlamp beam, and they weren't human eyes anymore. They were the eyes of things that had found a way to never be hungry again. And they wanted to share their discovery with me. I backed out of the cave as fast as I could without running. Running in caves gets you killed. You trip, hit your head on low-hanging rock, fall into a crevice. But every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away from the Hendricks family and whatever they'd become. The whispers followed me out, not just from the family, but from deeper in the cave system. Voices that spoke in languages I'd never heard, telling me about hunger and satisfaction and the taste of warm blood on a cold night. The words seemed to burrow into my brain, making my empty stomach twist with want. Outside the cave, the cold hit me like a physical blow. The sun had set while I was underground, and the temperature was dropping fast. My thermometer read -25 now, which was impossible. Weather doesn't change that quickly, not even in the mountains. But I could see my breath freezing in the air, ice crystals that fell like snow. The trees around me creaked and groaned with cold, branches starting to crack from the sudden freeze. Whatever was happening in Witch Hollow, it was getting worse. I tried the radio again. Static. Satellite phone showed no signal. I was cut off, 25 miles from the nearest road, with a family of cannibals in the cave behind me and something else stalking through the forest ahead. Because something was definitely out there. I could see tracks in the snow that hadn't been there when I went into the cave. Not human tracks. These were longer, narrower, with what looked like claw marks at the front. They circled the cave entrance like whatever made them had been pacing, waiting for me to come out. The tracks were huge, easily twice the length of my boots, and sunk deep into the snow like they'd been made by something very heavy. They led away from the caves, back toward the deeper parts of Witch Hollow, where the trees grew thick and the shadows never lifted. I should have stayed put, waited for backup, tried to establish radio contact from higher ground. Standard procedure when you're lost or cut off. But the whispers from the cave were getting louder, and I could hear movement back there in the darkness. The Hendricks family was coming out, and I didn't want to be there when they did. I followed the strange tracks deeper into the valley. The forest changed as I went. The trees were bigger here, older, covered in ice that made them look like crystal sculptures. My headlamp beam barely penetrated the shadows between them. Everything was silent except for the crunch of snow under my snowshoes and the sound of my own breathing. The hunger was getting worse. I'd eaten all my energy bars, but my stomach felt like it was eating itself from the inside. I caught myself looking at the tracks I was following and wondering what kind of meat made them. Fresh meat, warm meat, meat that would taste better than anything I'd ever eaten. I bit my tongue again, hard enough to draw blood. The pain helped, but not much. Whatever was happening to me, it was the same thing that had happened to the Hendricks family. Something in Witch Hollow was making people hungry. Hungry for things they shouldn't want to eat. The tracks led to a clearing where several massive hemlocks had fallen, creating a natural shelter. The snow here was trampled down, stained with dark patches that looked black in my headlamp, but smelled like copper, like blood. I found the remains of the youngest Hendricks boy in the center of the clearing. Marcus had been 10 years old, a quiet kid who liked to draw pictures of dinosaurs. What was left of him was scattered across the snow in pieces, bones cracked open and sucked clean. But this wasn't like the neat pile of bones in the cave. This was violent, frenzied, like something had torn him apart in a feeding frenzy. The worst part was that some of the bite marks looked human, small human, like they'd been made by his own family. I knelt in the bloody snow, trying to process what I was seeing. The Hendricks family had found someone else's bones in the cave, old bones that had been there for years. But Marcus was fresh, killed recently, which meant they'd graduated from eating the dead to eating each other. That's when I heard the footsteps behind me. I spun around, headlamp beam sweeping across the trees. Nothing, but I could hear something moving out there in the darkness, circling the clearing just beyond the reach of my light, something big enough to make the snow crunch with each step. "Sarah?" I called out, hoping it was just the boy's mother looking for her son. "Sarah, is that you?" The footsteps stopped. For a moment, the forest was completely silent. Then I heard breathing, slow and deep, like something much larger than a human taking in air. The breath came out as visible vapor clouds, white against the darkness. "So hungry," a voice whispered from the shadows. It might have been Sarah Hendricks, but it was deeper now, distorted, so very hungry. More footsteps. From multiple directions. The whole family was out there, surrounding me. I could hear them moving through the trees, communicating in whispers, and soft clicking sounds that didn't sound human anymore. I pulled out my flare gun, the only real weapon I carried. Park Service policy was non-lethal force only, but the flare gun could blind an aggressive animal long enough for me to get away. I hoped it would work on whatever the Hendricks family had become. "Stay back," I yelled, turning in a slow circle to cover all directions. "I'm armed." Laughter from the darkness. Multiple voices, including children's voices, all laughing at the same time. The sound echoed off the trees, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "You can't hurt us," Jake's voice called out, though he sounded older now, like his voice had dropped years in just a few hours. "We're past pain, past cold, past everything except the hunger." "And the hunger is so beautiful," Emma's voice added. She was only 8, but she sounded ancient. "It fills you up and empties you out at the same time. Want to try?" Something moved at the edge of my reedy headlamp beam. A tall, thin figure that might have been Sarah Hendricks, but stretched out wrong. Too tall, too thin, with arms that hung down past her knees. She stepped into the light, and I saw what she'd become. Her face was gaunt, skin pulled tight over bones that seemed larger than they should be. Her eyes were solid black, reflecting my headlamp like an animal's. Her mouth was too wide, filled with teeth that were too sharp. When she smiled, I could see that some of them were broken, stained with dark blood. "We found the secret," she said, taking a step toward me. "The old secret. The hungry secret. Want to learn?" Behind her, more figures emerged from the darkness. The children, changed like their mother, moving with jerky motions like marionettes. They surrounded me, getting closer with each step. I raised the flare gun, aimed at Sarah. "Don't make me do this." "Do what?" she asked, tilting her head at an impossible angle. You can't kill hunger. You can only feed it. That's when I realized they weren't the real threat. Something else was moving in the forest behind them, something much larger, making the trees sway as it passed. I could hear branches breaking, hear the deep footsteps of something that dwarfed even the transformed Hendricks family. The real predator was coming. The thing that had changed them, that was trying to change me. The thing that had been whispering to me from the cave, filling my head with thoughts of fresh meat and warm blood. The Wendigo. It stepped into the clearing like a nightmare made flesh, 12 feet tall, emaciated to the point where I could see every bone beneath its gray skin. Its arms hung down to its knees, ending in hands with fingers like icicles. Its face was a skull wrapped in tight skin, with eyes like black holes and a mouth full of broken teeth. When it spoke, its voice was the wind through dead trees, the sound of starvation itself. "Join us," it whispered, and I felt the words in my bones. "Feed with us, never be hungry again." The transformed Hendricks family moved aside to let it pass. It walked toward me on legs like tree branches, leaving footprints in the snow that steamed with supernatural cold. I fired the flare. The bright red light hit the Wendigo's center mass, and it screamed. The sound was like winter itself, crying out in pain, so loud and sharp that I dropped to my knees with my hands over my ears. The creature staggered backward, batting at the burning flare attached to its chest. But it didn't fall. It didn't even seem seriously hurt. It just looked at me with those black hole eyes and smiled with its broken teeth. "Fire," it said, almost admiringly. "Clever, but not enough." It reached for me with one impossibly long arm. That's when the hunger hit me like a physical blow, doubling me over with cramps so severe I couldn't breathe. My empty stomach felt like it was full of acid, eating through my internal organs. I looked up at the Wendigo's emaciated form and suddenly understood exactly what I needed to do to make the pain stop. I needed to eat. I needed to feed. I needed to join them in their eternal hunger. I took a step toward the creature, my hand reaching out to touch its gray skin. The Wendigo's skin was like touching winter itself. Cold that burned, cold that went deeper than flesh and bone, cold that froze the soul. But underneath that supernatural chill, I could feel something else. Warmth, life, the promise that I would never be hungry again if I just gave in. Just let it change me the way it had changed the Hendricks family. "Yes," the creature whispered, its breath forming ice crystals in the air between us. "You understand now. The hunger is everything. The hunger is peace." My hand was inches from its chest when my radio crackled again. "Ranger Drummond, this is SAR Team Leader Collins. We have your position. ETA 15 minutes. Hold your location and signal. With flares if possible." The voice from the outside world hit me like a slap. Suddenly, I could think clearly again, could see what I was about to do. I jerked my hand back, stumbled away from the Wendigo, fumbled for another flare. The creature's face twisted with rage. "You cannot leave. You have tasted the hunger. You belong to us now." "No," I said, loading the flare gun with shaking hands. "I belong to myself." The Wendigo lunged forward with inhuman speed. I fired the second flare point blank into its face. This time the scream was even louder, a sound like the death of winter itself. The creature fell backward, clawing at its burning features. The transformed Hendricks family turned on me then, moving with the same unnatural speed. Sarah reached me first, her two long arms wrapping around my chest. Her grip was like being squeezed by frozen steel cables. "If you won't join willingly," she hissed in my ear, "we'll make you join." I still had one flare left, but my arms were pinned. Sarah's strength was incredible, far beyond what any human could possess. I could feel my ribs starting to crack under the pressure. Then Jake grabbed my legs, his changed face grinning up at me with those sharp teeth. "Don't worry," he said. "It only hurts for a little while. Then you'll understand everything." Emma, the 8-year-old who now looked like a starving old woman, reached for my face with fingers that ended in black claws. "We'll start with your eyes," she said in her ancient voice. "They taste the best when they're fresh." I did the only thing I could think of. I bit down on Sarah's arm as hard as I could. She screamed and let go, stumbling backward. My teeth had drawn blood, and the taste of it on my tongue sent waves of hunger through my body so intense that I almost collapsed. For a moment, I understood exactly why the family had turned cannibal. The taste was incredible, like nothing I'd ever experienced. I wanted more. I needed more. But I also knew that if I gave in, if I took another bite, I would become like them. The hunger would consume me completely. I spit out the blood and ran. The forest was a maze of shadows and ice-covered trees. I could hear them behind me, all of them, crashing through the underbrush with inhuman speed. The Wendigo's voice followed me, promising relief from the hunger, promising satisfaction beyond anything I could imagine. I ran deeper into Witch Hollow, following old game trails that twisted between the massive hemlocks. My snowshoes kept me from sinking into the deep drifts, but they also slowed me down. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit were getting closer. That's when I remembered the old stories. Not the tourist versions, but the real ones my grandfather had told me when I was a kid. Stories about Wendigos and winter hunger, and the people who had fought them. Fire was one weapon, but there was another. Running water. Wendigos couldn't cross running water. I changed direction, heading for Cranberry Creek. In February, most of it would be frozen solid, but there were places where the current ran too fast to freeze completely. Springs that bubbled up from underground, keeping small sections open even in the worst cold. I found one just as the Wendigo caught up to me. The creature burst from the tree line behind me, moving on all fours now like some impossibly large spider. Its burning face had healed, the flesh regenerating as I watched. Behind it came the Hendricks family, their changed forms barely recognizable as human anymore. Between me and them was a stretch of open water, maybe 10 feet across, steam rising from its surface where the spring water met the frozen air. "Clever girl," the Wendigo said, slowing to a walk as it approached the creek bank. "But you cannot run forever. The hunger will bring you back to us." It was right. I could already feel the cramps starting again, the emptiness that demanded to be filled. How long could I resist? How long before I came back to them willingly, begging to join their eternal feast? "Maybe," I said, pulling out my last flare. "But you won't be here when I do." I fired the flare not at the Wendigo, but at the deadfall dam that blocked the creek 50 yards upstream. Tons of fallen trees and accumulated debris that had been holding back winter's runoff for months. The flare hit the dam dead center and exploded in a shower of sparks. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the whole structure caught fire, dry wood and dead leaves going up like a torch. The fire ate through the dam in seconds. Tons of backed-up water and ice came roaring down the creek channel like a freight train, carrying burning debris and chunks of ice the size of cars. The Wendigo saw it coming and tried to flee, but the flood was too fast. The wall of water hit it dead on, sweeping it away downstream along with the transformed Hendricks family. I saw them tumbling in, the current, their inhuman forms twisting and struggling against the flow. Then they were gone, carried away into the darkness. I stood on the bank, watching the water run red with blood and black with ash. The hunger was still there, still clawing at my insides, but it was weaker now. Manageable. Like a normal hunger, instead of the supernatural compulsion that had almost consumed me. Behind me, I could hear helicopters approaching. Search and rescue, coming to find me in the darkness. I pulled out my last emergency flare and fired it into the sky, marking my position. As I waited for rescue, I looked back toward the caves where this had all started. In the distance, I could see lights moving in the darkness. More of them, I realized. More Wendigos, drawn by the commotion. Witch Hollow wasn't done with its hunger. It was just getting started, but that would be someone else's problem. I was going home. They found me hypothermic and delirious, talking about cannibals and monsters to medics who thought I was suffering from exposure. The official report listed the Hendricks family as victims of an avalanche, their bodies swept away by the flood I'd accidentally caused when I fired the flare. No mention of teeth marks or gnawed bones or impossible transformations. No mention of the Wendigo. I spent 3 days in the hospital, being treated for severe hypothermia and what they called wilderness psychosis, a stress reaction that could cause hallucinations in extreme survival situations. The doctors were very understanding. They said it was common for rescuers to blame themselves when they couldn't save everyone, to create elaborate explanations for tragedies that were really just bad luck and worse weather. I let them think that. It was easier than trying to explain the truth. but I couldn't forget. Even now, 6 months later, I can't forget the taste of Sarah Hendrick's blood on my tongue or the way the hunger felt when it really took hold. I can't forget the Wendigo's black hole eyes or the promise it made about never being hungry again. I transferred to desert rescue work in Arizona the week I got out of the hospital. Told my supervisor I needed a change of scenery, wanted to work somewhere warmer. He understood. A lot of mountain rescue workers burn out eventually, move on to easier assignments where people don't freeze to death in February. But that's not really why I left. I left because I can't handle the cold anymore. Every time the temperature drops below 40 degrees, I start to feel it again. The hunger. The emptiness that demands to be filled with things that shouldn't be eaten. In the desert heat, I can almost forget what happened in Witch Hollow, almost convince myself it was just a hallucination brought on by stress and hypothermia. The nightmare started about a month after the incident. Always the same dream. I'm back in that cave, sitting in a circle with the Hendricks family, sharing their meal of human bones. In the dream, I'm grateful. In the dream, I finally understand what they were trying to teach me about hunger and satisfaction and the peace that comes with never wanting anything again. I wake up from those dreams so hungry I could eat my own hand. But food doesn't help. Normal food tastes like cardboard, like ash, like nothing at all. The only thing that makes the hunger go away is thinking about meat. Fresh meat, warm meat. Meat that fights back. I've lost 30 pounds since February. My friends say I look gaunt, hollow-eyed. They worry about me, suggest I see a therapist, talk to someone about what happened in the mountains. They don't understand that talking won't help. The Wendigo marked me, changed something fundamental inside me. I managed to resist it that night in Witch Hollow, but the hunger is still there, waiting. I still get calls sometimes, from other rangers who've heard stories about Witch Hollow. Strange disappearances, campers found in impossible conditions, reports of something large moving through the forest in winter. They want to know what really happened to the Hendricks family. They want to know if the stories about cannibals and monsters are true. I tell them what I told the investigators. Avalanche, flood, tragic accident. I tell them to stay out of Witch Hollow in winter, to close the trails if they have to. Most of them listen, some don't. Last week, I got a call from a ranger named Martinez up in Colorado. He'd found a family of hikers near Rabbit Ears Pass, all dead, all partially consumed. The scene looked exactly like what I'd described in my report about the Hendricks case. He wanted to know if I thought there might be a connection. I told him no. I told him it was probably just exposure and scavenger activity after death. I told him these things happen in the mountains sometimes, that nature doesn't care about human sensibilities, but I know the truth. The Wendigo didn't die in that flood. Things like that don't die from drowning or fire or any conventional weapon. They just move on, find new hunting grounds, new families to transform. The hunger spreads like a disease, turning victims into carriers who infect others with their need to feed. It's spreading. Every winter, there are more reports. More families found in impossible conditions, more hikers who disappear without a trace, more people like me, marked by the hunger but not yet consumed by it, walking around with something broken inside them that demands to be fed. I know I should warn someone, contact the authorities, file a real report about what's happening in places like Witch Hollow. But who would believe me? And what could they do against something that feeds on hunger itself, that turns its victims into willing accomplices? Sometimes, late at night when the dreams are particularly bad, I think about going back, not to fight the Wendigo, but to join it. To finally give in to the Grastumsexation, hunger, that's been eating me alive from the inside for 6 months. It would be so easy, so peaceful. No more fighting, no more pretending to be normal, no more waking up every morning with the taste of ash in my mouth. Just hunger. Pure, clean, eternal hunger. But not yet. I'm not ready yet. There are still people out there who need to be warned. Still families who might be saved if they know what to look for. I write reports, file warnings, try to keep people away from the places where the hunger lives. It's not much, but it's something. It's human. And as long as I can remember what human feels like, maybe I can keep fighting the thing that wants to make me something else. My name is Catherine Drummond. I've been a park ranger for 14 years. I've never lost anyone. That's the story I tell myself, anyway. The truth is more complicated. The truth is that I lost 5 people in Witch Hollow, and I lost myself too. What came out of those mountains wasn't really Kate Drummond anymore. It was something else, something marked by hunger, something waiting for winter to come again. But for now, in the desert heat, I can almost pretend I'm still human. Almost.